welcome to Lunch with Sibos with me, Nadine Dereza.
And with me, Chia. Coming up in the program, the Sibos big interview with the head of Global Transaction Services Strategy at Bank of America Merrill Lynch, Jonathon Traer-Clark.
We'll also bring you a panel discussion focusing on diversity and inclusion.
Plus, an interview with the head of Trade, Supply Chain and Export Finance at Danske Bank, that's Soren Haugaard.
And now it's time for the Sibos Game Changer. Yes, our series of interviews with thought leaders and influencers from the world of finance and beyond. And this time, we spoke to one of the world's leading futurists.
Today's interviewee has really earned the title of Game Changer, listed as one of the top 100 influencers in technology by Wired magazine. My guest is an authority on the ethical implications of the relationship between people and technology. I'm joined by CEO of the futures agency, Gerd Leonhard. Gerd, thanks for joining us.
Hello.
So you are described as someone who brings information from the future so businesses can make better decisions in the present. Okay, how does that work?
Well, as a futurist, I don't predict stuff, right? I observe what's happening, and then I zoom about 5 to 8 years in the future for the obvious things that will happen, and I'll take that information, we call it bringing the flame back, right? So we take the idea, for example, 5 to 7 years, quite clearly we're going to have more cars with electric engines than gas engines. We bring this back, and then we try to help companies reinvent what they do, how they do it, how they make money, how they will continue to exist, right? Because that's the challenge, right?
So it's not really crystal ball gazing. You're not looking that far ahead. You're looking at technology that already is almost certain will happen.
Well, I always say that basically what I do, most people could do if they spend 100% of the time on it, right? But you know, people are very busy. So if you're running a company with 100,000 employees, how are you going to get enough information about the future? You don't have time, right? So we do that for people, and we have what we call futurize, right? We futurize organizations and governments and people.
Well, you were sharing at the Intertribe session, the Future Show Live. You presented some key trends for the next 5 years. Share with us some of those trends.
Well, the next 5 years, you know, this is going to be quite mind-boggling. We always say that the next 20 years will be more different than the previous 300 years. So now we're looking at things like computers that can think, you know, so-called artificial intelligence, cognitive computing, connected things, devices, pipelines, gas lines, cars, wristwatches, cloud computing replacing anything that's physical, moving into the cloud. Media is already in the cloud. Right? The possibility of genetic engineering, nanotechnology, digital money, of course, which is a huge thing, basically money turning into data. Right? So datafication, virtualization, robots, possibly the end of work before too long, the way that we know it, because computers will be able to do a lot of the work.
That's right.
That's routine.
That's right.
And that's going to change governments. I think it's 90% positive, but will require quite a bit of hand-holding, you know?
Okay, well, with everything that has an upside, there's usually a bit of a downside at least. But before we get to that, I mean, specific to the finance industry then, what are some of the trends that will be most relevant to them?
Well, what we call the mega trends, the mega shifts, those are essentially trends like digitization of everything, which means that transaction cost goes down, transparency increases, which means margin goes down. Like in the music business, you know, music is basically free now. So financial transactions will become more or less free or very, very, very cheap. Right?
Okay, so you're talking about things like Spotify, which sort of made
Spotify
accessible.
18 million songs for €8, right?
Yeah.
It used to be €20 for one CD. So the unit price is just gone, right? And the same is going to happen with financial transactions, wealth management, information. The possibilities that clients have all the information of the world at their fingertips, using smart computing and intelligent assistants. That used to be the bankers, right? Well, it was supposed to be the bankers, right? That know everything, and now everybody knows everything, right? And then, of course, economic things are changing to a really global scenario. United States of Europe, which is a concept, I think we're seeing that currently under fire, but in 10 years we will have that. And that's going to be a huge financial relief for things like military or police or cybersecurity, but it will completely create new economies.
Right.
So I think there's sort of what I call hell then, you know, it's hell and heaven at the same time. Huge opportunities, but old business models based on people not having access or being too regulated, being protected, that will evaporate, just like the car business is now evaporating from selling cars to
self-driving
selling
cars.
Mobility. Right? And that is not a bad thing, it's just different.
It's only a bad thing if I'm not ready to embrace it. And that could be a challenge for some institutions who may not be ready to embrace it. I mean, will that be a really scary thought for them?
I think the biggest challenge is awareness of these things that are definitely going to change. And so you get into sort of an assumption that the business in 10 years will be very much like today, with a couple marginal improvements, especially if you're successful. And that's, I work with lots of banks on this. Their problem is they're so successful, they can't imagine that the recipe of success will not be the same. Right? And the same is true for the pharma business, medical business. Right? When you're so successful and then somebody comes up, some startup from China or Silicon Valley, just undermining your, like Airbnb's undermining hotels, right? Same thing. Right? I call this a Tesla moment. And you realize all of a sudden these guys weren't just crazy; they're actually real, and it's happening. And if you're not aware of that, then you won't be ready.
So it's your job to help them be aware of that, because I mean, some of these things happen, as you mentioned, it happens now, and you think, yeah, it'll take a while, and before you know it, it's there.
Well, there's two simple rules. One is assume less, discover more. Right, so you don't assume that everything is going to be as it is, right? You're open for other discoveries, right? And the other one is that the world is no longer linear, right? It's exponential. So the changes are doubling every 18 months in technology, which means in roughly 10 years, you're 30 times X as far, and 30 times gets you to a billion, right? So what technology can do in 5 years, you won't even have a chance of imagining today. And so this is really crucial, is to try to understand that this is no longer just crawling along. It's basically like warp drive.
Right.
In all of those areas, like the blockchain and decentralized computing, cloud computing, peer-to-peer exchanges, all that stuff.
Do you think those areas will happen in almost a hyper-speed kind of fashion? I mean, now we're still talking about it. It's something that comes over, is a more long-term view. It takes years to come in, but...
Well, that depends what it is. For example, peer-to-peer exchanges are here now. They will explode, right? The gig economy, to where I contribute work outside of companies, that's happening. A decentralized money system that is a digital currency around the world, that will take around 10 years, but it will definitely happen because the benefits are huge for the consumers, right? And there's lots of regulatory issues. But, you can see regulation is now changing much faster than it used to, because technology is putting a lot of pressure on that. So, and of course, your competition isn't the other guys, the other banks. It's the new guys, the platforms, the Alibabas and Baidus and all those that come in from underneath and just nibble away at 50 points, right? And sooner or later just crashes.
Yeah, hence the term co-opetition. I think that's the new term that's been come out.
Yeah, so I think if you're aware of that, that's the best protection. And if you keep your assumptions open and you discover new things, right? And it's also about creating human value, not just technology value. That's what my book is all about.
Yeah, we want to talk about that, because it's not just about the technology itself, but it's how it's relevant to people as well. I mean, if no one's using it, obviously it's useless. So what are some of the complications there, especially the ethical implications that might come about?
I like to say that we should embrace technology, but not become technology. Because the problem is when you use technology, the primary concern is efficiency. So you make it more efficient, quicker, right? And however, if everybody is efficient, it's a race to the bottom, right? Everybody's hyper efficient, customer service is automated, money is digital, and the whole thing is a giant machine, right? But we have to realize that people don't do business with machines. Right? It's based on trust, relationships, meaningfulness, relevance, human things. And so the human factor is a much bigger factor than technology, but it's harder to engineer. It's harder to get it right. So I'd like to say, if you transcend technology, you can find a powerful business model that will be about brand, about purpose, about responsibility, about trust. Right? And that is extremely important in the financial sector. So if you have bad tech, you will not survive. Right? But if you have good tech and no trust, you're also dead.
That's right.
So
and that is a big problem. And actually, we've been talking a lot about technology here at Sibos, but we haven't been talking so much about the people involved, or the users, and how it will relate to them, So do you think that's going to be the challenge for the industry? That while they're all wanting to jump on the bandwagon for this new technology, have they thought about, what's it going to mean to my client? How is he going to use it?
Well, there's a lot of short-sighted thinking about technology becoming the giant margin increaser. I can fire 10,000 people in customer service and use 100 people that use computers, right? Or apps or software, right? And that may be true, but it's ultimately, it doesn't go anywhere, right? It doesn't generate human value. So it's better to take people and reassign them into value creation things, added values for clients, right? If you're going to let your clients use an automated customer service system like Amelia or something, right? That's great, but then what else are you going to do to increase value? Otherwise, you become a commodity, like Spotify. Music is a commodity, right?
Right.
So then you make playlists and you make extra things, right? And that is the key, right? So you should not ignore the fact that technology is, in the end, a giant equalizer. Right? And you have to reinvent and transcend technology to create new meaning.
What about people themselves? I mean, are they worried about how this could, things like artificial intelligence could really change the way we live, work, and play? I mean, how far on are we in that area? Do you feel that it will become an affecting power in our lives?
Well, anything that's routine will be replaced by machines. And that is a checkout clerk at the supermarket, the truck driver between cities, the guy that cleans the airport, the guy that inputs the data for a transaction, the accountants, right, to some degree, right?
Yeah.
So anything that's routine, eventually machines will be smart enough. That's roughly 7 years, what's called the singularity, the point of where machines have the same computing power and they can understand language between people, which they kind of can now, and images. So that's 7 years away. And at that point, we have to say, really, our job is to become more human, right? To negotiate, to invent, to discuss, right? To be compassionate, to have empathy, to create value, because trust is not an algorithm, right? Trust is not affected. I mean, it can be destroyed by mouse click, but you cannot create trust by saying, I like you on some social network, right?
Yeah.
That's quite different. So our job is to move up the Maslow pyramid towards the self-realization, meaning, wisdom, the added values.
Yeah, that's a little bit philosophical, though. It's almost like saying, well, let's give people time to be people, to do the things that human beings should be doing. And I guess technology is meant to do that, to allow you more time to be with your family.
That's what it will do, yes.
Right, but what if? I mean, because a lot of times we'll embrace technology and do that and then say, okay, instead of going home with my family, let me go do something else.
That's because it wasn't exponential yet. The thing is, technology has always made promises that it can't deliver.
Yeah.
Like artificial intelligence has been promised for 50 years, never happened. But now, we have the first thinking machines in business right now, right? And this is like the self-driving car we talked about for 50 years, the electric car for 100 years, right? Didn't happen. But it's science fiction becoming science fact, right? So if you believe that because it didn't happen, it's not going to happen, then you're completely on the wrong planet, right? Because technology is now at the pivot point where these things become possible. So we have to get used to, probably in 10 years, we'll be working 3 or 4 hours a day.
Yeah.
Right now we're working more because of technology, because it's not working well. So you lie in bed at night doing your update or something, right? But once technology works well and is really intelligent and controlled by us, hopefully, we can delegate. We can have digital copies of myself doing things for me. We already have that.
Yeah.
It's just cumbersome. So that's the hope, is that we'll work less, make the same money, find more time to do human things, also relevant for companies, right? Trust, relationship, branding. But in 20 years, I think we may run out of work as we know it.
In 20 years, just 20 years, we'll run out of work.
Well, as an Oxford report saying 65% of jobs are going to be automated away. This sounds like bad news, but there's many, many new jobs, like drone operators that fly blood supply all over Africa. There's many new things. But in the end, it means that we are going to separate work from income. That's 25, 30 years, depending on the political system.
Okay, so it becomes quite a different world. It's a different concept to living, almost.
It's referred to as post-capitalism, which doesn't mean there won't be money or capitalism. It just means the logic of what we do. Right now we work for a living, to make a living, but also for a purpose. Right? And so the purpose of what we do for work may be separate than what we make for the money, egged on by technology.
Okay. So what is the downside of all this? What are some of the areas, the danger areas that technology might also bring with it?
Well, exponential technology like the Internet of Things, digital money, and so they're essentially like nuclear power. We can make a power plant and heat some homes, or we can make a bomb, right? And to a large degree, it's the same stuff. Technology has the potential to be extremely disruptive and destructive to us and erode human values. For example, falling in love with a robot, right, is entirely possible because very soon you'll have pretty smart robots, right? And this is not science fiction, right? Or changing the way that we fire people or hire people because of algorithms. It's called algorithmic management, right? It sounds like science fiction already here, right? The end of dying, aging to be 150 years old. So those are challenges, data protection, privacy, surveillance, application to where I give control to machines. They're pretty small now, and most people are not concerned, but they are going to exponentially explode, right? I mean, imagine if your money is connected to the internet, your health records are connected, your car is connected, your home is connected. You become completely subject to whatever if there's no protection, right?
That's right.
And that will need to be, that's a political scenario, and also for the companies to, these things will not happen until we have security.
Very quickly, one last question, crystal ball gazing now. What are you most excited about in the near future about all the technology that's going forward?
I think the potential to solve global problems, global warming, food, energy, water, right, to eradicate poverty, that's amazing. I'm worried about the side effects, but I think at this point, if we work together and create an ethical framework, we can deal with the side effects.
Okay, well, good. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Today's guest for the Sibos Big Interview is the head of Global Transaction Services Strategy at Bank of America Merrill Lynch, Jonathon Traer-Clark. Banks and corporates are facing increasingly fragmented marketplaces driven by globalization, digital delivery, and entrepreneurship. Putting the client center stage is essential to determining the direction and success of innovation, with Sibos playing a critical role in driving dialogue, debate, and collaboration between banks and fintech. So let me welcome to Sibos TV, Jonathon Traer-Clark. Jonathon, thanks for joining us.
Thank you.
Let's start off. The key challenges you feel that are facing the industry right now.
Right, so I mean, let's talk about the most obvious one, so digitization, right? The number of connected devices, as we all know, has gone from about 7 billion to about 50 billion just across the globe. The volume of data transferring around the world has increased about 43-fold over the past 3 or 4 years. Just the sheer volume of information has grown enormously. Then there's the second trend which we've identified, which is the rise of innovation or entrepreneurship. So 10 years ago, companies that are household names didn't even exist, right? The likes of the Facebooks, the likes of Alibaba, those sort of companies have grown and grown exponentially, probably more significant growth than we've ever seen in probably the last 100 years. Finally, as the other trend would be globalization. So I think what's more important now is that because of digitization, because of the rise of innovation, you can now transact globally and buy your goods and services from any part of the world, in any corner of the globe. And if you think there's over 200 countries globally, that presents you with challenges around currency conversions, different payment types, different instrument types, different means and methods of payment. So from a bank, you have to deal with a whole myriad of complexity, a myriad of interoperability, and then how do you serve your clients across all of those different geographies and those challenges and domains?
So do you see more opportunities or challenges for the banks?
I think a combination of both, right? I think what it's forcing the banks to do is actually to reconsider elements of their delivery of services and solutions to their clients, to, much like you'll see at Sibos here, think about embracing fintechs and other companies who are saying, we understand that there is ultimately a transaction, a payment between two parties, which is a consequence of selling a good, a service, or a product, but how might we deliver that? So I think what the fintechs are doing is sort of saying to us, there are new ways of doing that, and we are embracing that collaboration with them.
And how do you think banks or the industry as a whole should embrace fintech to sort of, will it give them a competitive advantage?
You mean for the fintechs or for the banks?
For the banks.
For the banks, I think the banks kind of, I mean, I'm a former client, so I joined Bank of America a couple of years ago. I used to be a treasurer at a very large multinational corporation. So what I want to see is banks collaborating together. I think that will give them a competitive advantage. There are certain banks that play to their strengths. So do you want to deliver all of your services in every single geography across the world? Or would you rather look at different channels and means by which to do that? So if you talk to a fintech, there are new ways of doing it, right? So how, in 10 years now, you can actually make payment with your phone or even your watch.
That's right.
Right? So through contactless and other sorts of new sort of thought leadership. In the US, you can receive monies just by providing an email address.
Right.
So alias-based payments are taking off too. These are all available to us because of financial technology and innovation in that space.
Okay, and I mean, we also know that with your bank, Bank of America Merrill Lynch, is also just tied up with Microsoft to
That's right,
using blockchain technology to take things to that next level. Maybe just share with us a bit about that too.
Oh, great. Thank you for asking. I mean, we're very proud of that. So in the trade finance space, it's typically a very paper-orientated methodology of transacting and ensuring essentially trade flows between counterparties. So from a corporate perspective, from a client perspective, it's tedious. From a bank's perspective, you get a lot of risk introduced simply from a counterparty perspective because of all the paperwork. So we work together with Microsoft, and you can actually view it live here at the show if you go down to their stand, using the Azure blockchain as a service solution to essentially pilot a way of doing a standby letter of credit using a distributed ledger, so you can interact between different counterparties across that. And we're particularly proud of that. And it's those kind of pilot innovations that help push the agenda forward for our clients and for the industry as a whole.
And how significant a change do you think that is for your clients? I mean, was that really the priority or the purpose, the intention perhaps behind it all?
Yeah, clients are increasingly sort of saying to us that whilst they are comfortable with the existing services and solutions that we offer, they hear about new innovations. As individual consumers themselves, they're used to interacting with their financial well-being in a very different way. So they're sort of saying, what can that bring to me as a corporate, for my business? And one of the simplest answers to that is simply time and availability of money, flow of working capital. I mean, at this conference and many other conferences, working capital has been a continuous theme for the corporate, and the acceleration of that to enable them to facilitate their capital strategy has been something they've all been looking for.
Do you think technology will ever become a differentiating factor for banks? So a customer may choose bank A over bank B because they do things a certain way, while the other bank doesn't.
I think it's one factor that you would consider. Certainly whenever, in my previous role, whenever we would consider a proposal for new services, we would certainly look at the roadmap to technical innovation that the company would, or the bank being considered would be offering. We'd want to look for sustainable innovation over a period of time as well. We don't expect them to disclose all of their forward thinking, but we want to know that they're investing in this for the long term. That stability mitigates a lot of risk for the client.
And looking at it from both a client and the bank's perspective, because you'll be on both sides, I mean, how important is it that the bank customize its services to the customer?
So now you bring up another interesting point, which is, I think, is interoperability. We need to provide, in the same way when you buy a new car, you might choose the paint color, right? But you're essentially still buying a product which is a car. Unlike Henry Ford, we do want you to be able to consume that in colors other than black, right? And we would like you to be able to essentially tailor it to your business. But technology has a role to play there. There's an awful lot of translation that goes on between corporate systems, ERP systems, settlement systems, treasury systems, etc., and of course then the bank systems and products as well. That translation between those things is where standards can also play a part. So you'll have the likes of ISO 20022, which is a standard around bank transactions, and all corporates and banks are moving towards that.
Yeah, and we're talking about that, how it will be a common language, I guess, for banks to sort of be on the same platform. But but at the same time, that also we know is a big challenge, a different kind of challenge.
I mean, think about Swift, right? So Swift is a standard message format used by thousands of institutions around the world. So we know how to do it, right? We've done it. We've built forums and ways of doing that. The role, I think, of places such as Sibos is to continue to promote that collaboration. It still allows you as a bank to differentiate for exactly the Henry Ford example we used, right? Different flavors of the same thing. But you also create the interoperability and security for your customers too.
How much of this requires a certain critical mass from, because coming on to the new technology, again, if no one's using it, then no one else wants to get on. So it's kind of a bit of a pyramid, right?
What do you mean?
I mean, in the sense that if you get on it, then I may get on it. If I get on it, he may get on it. And eventually, if everyone's on it, then it works. But if only you are on it, then...
Again, I think that's where collaboration helps, right? If we're all investing in creating use cases, I mean, the World Economic Forum released a report in the last week where they defined 6 or 7 use cases just for trade finance alone across the world. Why did they do that? Because the amount of investment in fintech has quadrupled just in the last 3 or 4 years. I mean, I think it's running around about $12 billion a year. So you don't invest those kind of sums unless you actually feel like there's going to be a return and obviously a use case and business case behind it as well.
Okay, well, let's just talk about Sibos. What are some of the things that you're looking forward to while here in Geneva?
Well, obviously there's always meeting our clients, number one, which is great, and hearing from them the sort of things that they're exploring. So increasingly, in my role, that every conversation I've had has been, what are you doing with blockchain?
Yeah.
Are you looking at Ripple or R3? Are you thinking about the ways that your payment networks and infrastructure are working? So that's a sharing exercise as much as a listening exercise. Yeah. So we talk about the areas where we're looking, and in many cases we're actually working with these banks in those forums. The Global Payments Initiative that SWIFT has set up, we're one of the 80 banks in that. We're working together into small groups to kind of test out different use cases. So we're having conversations about that. Other than that, there's some great plenary sessions. Yeah. I think blockchain has been a constant theme across the conference. And I think the conference has a very upbeat feel to it this year. There's a real buzz and an energy in the air and a sense that change is coming. Right. And I think it's good change. It's like moving from your old spreadsheet working on MS-DOS to a Microsoft Office type format, and now thinking about doing that in a cloud sense as well. So I think this is one of those areas where you really can see a change for the better.
I had a chance to speak with a futurist who told me that in about 20 years I might be working only 6 hours a week with a sort of.
Does that sound good to you?
Yeah, I wasn't sure. I was just thinking to myself, what will I be doing with all that other time? Changing the way we really work, live, and play.
Yeah, I mean, I think I have 3 children, right? Yeah. So they tend to pick up their digital devices. We try to get them off it, but they do.
We all do.
And they are very, I would call it task orientated. So we've looked at, I guess, future trends around work-life balance, and what we're finding is those lines are blurring. And to your point, that could change the way that you work. My wife works in the morning and then in the afternoon, and then has a bit of a lull, and then picks up work again a bit later in the evening. That's just the way her workload is balanced, and she can do that.
Right.
We think that task orientation is probably a future trend that is one to look out for. That's probably down to automation and AI, which I know you've discussed previously.
That's right. And do you think the younger generation is well geared for that? I mean, millennials have an entirely different approach to work.
They do. I think they are probably more adaptive as a generation than any other generation that's gone before them. So actually, I think they're probably going to surprise us with some of the things that they're going to come out with.
All right. Well, we hope our children will surprise us anyway, don't we? in a good way.
I couldn't agree with you more. Absolutely.
Jonathon, great to speak with you. Thank you.
Thanks ever so much, Steve. Right. Take care.
I had a great time speaking to those two gentlemen.
Yes.
I mean, Gerd about the future, scary and exciting all at the same time, and Jonathon sort of sharing about how, it's really changing the way we live our lives today. So in this one session here, we're getting a glimpse of, I guess, life I started to see a bit of my life flashing before my eyes.
I thought they were great interviews, actually. Yeah. And Gerd from the Futures Agency, he was someone that was very practical and very tangible. You could see some of the things he was talking about.
Do you know he is a musician?
Oh,
that is where it all began. Well, I don't know what he plays, but he used to make... So, there you go. All our lives intertwined. And you know what? It's Geneva is another place that you want to visit if you have the chance to spend some time, because he was talking about how technology will free up time so we can do things that human beings should be doing, like enjoying, taking in the culture, the scenery, meeting people.
Well, indeed, but he did say about falling in love with your robot.
Oh, yeah. That was a bit... We'll see about that. Well, if you're not in love with your robot, you may be in love with your credit card. If you're looking to use that effectively, a bit of retail therapy might be helpful, yeah?
Oh, well, we don't like retail therapy, do we?
No, okay. But where should you go? Don't know. Nadine had a chance to check out the shops. Take a look.
You can't come to Geneva without taking some souvenirs home. Whatever your budget, there are plenty of places to browse. We went on a little shopping spree to see the best that Geneva has to offer. Whether you're in a hurry or want to take your time browsing, Geneva is a fantastic place to indulge in a little retail therapy. For local produce, cheese, honey and wine, head for the Carouge market. The area also boasts numerous independent shops and artisan workshops. That's something a little bit different. The main shopping district is located in the Rue Basse. Since 1891, Bongigny has been an iconic part of the retail scene, with designer labels to match its reputation over the last 125 years. The Globus department store is the perfect place for gifts, from the vast range of local chocolate brands to fine Swiss watches. In Geneva, you'll also find the flagship store for Victorinox, the famous Swiss Army knife. Whether you're looking for high fashion, practical gadgets, or you've somehow run out of socks or tights halfway through the conference, the shops of Geneva are always happy to do business with you. So hopefully, Stephen, that's given you a few present ideas for your families. You can't just bring them back freebies from Sibos.
No. Shh. They might be watching this, you know. Yeah. But I'm sure there's a lot more in store besides socks and tights that you can buy right now. Okay.
And in fact, if you saw the piece about the Carouge market, just to give you sort of a sense of where that is, that's a 10-minute drive away.
Okay.
And there's another market this Saturday. So I know some people like to extend their Sibos experience.
Why not?
So if you're hanging around at the weekend, fabulous place to go shopping around the Carouge, or right in the centre of Geneva, actually.
There you
so
go.
hopefully that's given you some great ideas. Well, diversity and inclusion was a big theme, wasn't it, Stephen, at last year's conference, and it remains so in 2016.
Well, banking is an industry that is, of course, truly global, and it's now widely accepted that as well as being the right thing to do, there is real commercial advantage in making sure that the talent within the industry is as diverse as the customers it serves.
We're joined now by 3 banking leaders who will share their own experiences and thoughts on diversity and inclusion.
On the panel, we have Kim Newell Chebator, Executive Vice President and Head of State Street Global Markets in EMEA. Dr. Herta von Stiegel, the Chairwoman of CHAPS.
I'm also joined by Chitwant Kohli, who is the Senior Vice President of Enterprise Operations and Payments at the Royal Bank of Canada. Welcome to you all. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.
And lovely to have you here. And I must say, what a diverse collection we have, just of clothes. You're not clashing with each other.
I think we know Herta knows if we're talking about her. That's a wonderful jacket.
And Chitwant, if I can start with you. Now, the term diversity and inclusion, it's a big theme, isn't it?
It is.
But is there a difference between diversity and inclusion, or does it mean the same thing?
Absolutely, there is a big difference. I mean, diversity is more like a fact that you have respect and recognition of the various differences that exist, whether they are related to age, gender, people's abilities, their thoughts, their background, etc., etc. So it is there. It's present everywhere. It's a fact. But inclusion, on the other hand, is talking about a state of what do you do with that diversity, right? How do you apply that? It's actually a choice that you have to make. Whereas, as I said, diversity is a fact, inclusion is a choice. You have to do something with that. Where diversity will signify or indicate a mix of different thoughts, different experiences, etc. And inclusion is about a state of affairs where how well you use that mix to realize your purpose, your objective, etc. So that's really very important for us to talk about, not just diversity for the sake of diversity, but what do we do with it, which is primarily the focus on inclusion.
And I'm just wondering, actually, when it comes to diversity and inclusion, is there a ratio of importance, Herta? I mean, is it equal, or is actually inclusion more important than diversity?
I think inclusion is actually more important because you can have diversity, and I look at it from the perspective of an executive or a boardroom or whatever. You can have people at the table, but if they are not included, if their voices are not heard, and then, quite frankly, that diversity is meaningless. It's really a function of wanting to listen, of wanting to hear, and including everybody's voice to get the full benefit of the diversity.
And Kim, what do you think? Do you agree with that?
I agree. I mean, the diversity is the building blocks, and the inclusion is what you have to do to make sure you take advantage of that. And I think that's upon leaders to make sure that they've set up the structures in place to have that inclusion. And it's not just a tick-the-box exercise of saying, oh, well, we have diversity, but we're still going to go with my way of doing things.
So I suppose...
Nadine, just to add to that, it's also about all the time you got to do it. You can't do that for this project, I was inclusive, etc.
Right.
It's an everyday thing. You got to do it.
I suppose in a way, it's like saying inclusion is making sure that the mix of everything is actually working. Are we agreed on that definition?
We are.
Yes.
And it's an active approach. It sounds like, it's something you're proactively pushing. I mean, perhaps Kim and Herta, I can put this to you also. I mean, was there a moment when you felt that, you really wanted to push this further, to be advocates for it? I mean, Kim?
Yeah, so obviously growing up in the financial industry, being a woman meant that I had to, have certain role models to ensure that I got there. But the aha moment for me was actually sponsoring our LGBT community. So I was invited to a dinner with Stonewall, and I went because I got to get dressed up and go to a fancy hotel. I didn't realize that meant I was going to learn so much. So the speakers and the challenges that the LGBT community had in feeling comfortable in their own skin at work was an aha moment to me, and I realized that instead of just passively supporting them, I needed to actively support that community, and I took on the role of the executive sponsor, supporting our Global Allies program, so being more active in it.
And how long ago was that?
That was 12 months ago, so it was just about
So you're quite new to that. How about for you, Chitwant? Where was your aha moment?
I think the main moment came, I attended one of these fundraising dinners for Eagle Seals. That's a charity organization in Canada that looks after people with disabilities, etc. And one of the speakers, who was a person with mental disabilities, which are hard to see, because remember I talked about diversity differences, but you can't even see that. And it was just a young lady who stood up and was sharing her experiences. And one thing she said that was my aha moment, I have never forgotten, I use it all the time. She said, please stop calling us people with disabilities. Right. The D does not stand for dis. D for us is we have different abilities. D stands for different abilities. We do have abilities that are different from what you may have in your mind or somebody else. So for me, that was just so groundbreaking. I said, wow, why do we treat people and say that you have disability, i.e. you are somewhat less than us or people who don't have it? All it is they just have a different ability. Exactly. And we got to find ways to utilize those abilities to the fullest or help them realize their fullest potential within that. And from there on, I have been a big advocate within my company, a sponsor of various efforts throughout our organization and even otherwise. So.
Well, we want to talk about that in just a moment. But Herta, we also want to hear from you.
I'd like to pick up on that on 2 points. One, I took a group of, and I will say disabled, I took a group of disabled and non-disabled climbers up Kilimanjaro. And the lessons from that experience were unrivaled because we naively thought that it would be a one-way street, that the non-disabled climbers, if you will, would support the disabled. it was very much a two-way street. We learned so much from each other, and sometimes until you are in that situation, you don't realize how much value we actually add to each other. And from a gender perspective, for me, I remember the aha moment as if it were yesterday. I was a managing director in London with a major financial institution, and up to that point, you wouldn't have caught me dead in an all-women's group, if you will. I mean, that was certainly not for me. And all of a sudden, I looked over my shoulder, and there were so few people who looked like me who were actually managing directors. And it was this realization, because I naively assumed that everybody can do it. If I can do it, everybody can do it.
And Herta, I know that was a subject of documentary, you going up to Mount Kilimanjaro. So you've been on television plenty of times before, I know you have. Let's think about those benefits, Kim, of greater diversity and inclusion. Have there been benefits, or has it just been a nice to have?
No, I mean, I think there's lots of benefits. So, when I run my team meetings, if I don't think there's enough diversity in the room, I know we're not going to get to the right answer. So I'll recruit it. I'll bring it in from other departments. Because I think you're not going to get to the best answer. You may get to a good answer. You may get to the right answer. But you're not going to get to the best answer unless you hear different people's perspective. And that's not always the known, diversities like the LGBT or the disabled or, the ones we kind of list. It's different thought processes that go into that. And sometimes you just need to think about, how you're going to get that different thought in the conversation.
And what have you seen as a direct result? What kind of benefits, tangibly? Are we talking about better performance, better bottom lines, more staff retention, or people wanting to join the business? What have been those tangible benefits?
Yes, so bottom lines are tough to come by in our market these days. So I'd like to think that it's helping. But what I would say is the more demonstrable is the type of people we're recruiting into the organization. I run a trading desk, which isn't always known for diversity, and suddenly I'm getting our group's getting a reputation for, actually, I do want to come in, because they are looking for people that are like me, not always kind of the trader type people. So I think we're getting a more useful workforce. I actually think we're getting done things quicker too, because I think with the different perspectives that come into it, we're actually not having to say, okay, well, here's the decision, and then leaving the room and getting 10 other people to think about it. By having that all in one place, we're kind of saying, okay, yep, we heard all the points, now let's move forward and get things done quicker.
Well, Chitwant, what do you think? Where does the finance or banking industry rather stand in terms of in relevance to other industries? How far are they ahead of the curve in that sense in this area?
I think overall, and I'll be specific to Canada, but I'm very familiar with the global industry as well. I think financial institutions have done a great job so far. A little bit of a maybe hiccup due to the financial crisis a few years ago, that the pace of progress that they were making on this front might have slowed a little bit, but they have picked up again on this, because the value proposition is so significant. It's not at all social. It's truly a business imperative. And if you were to ask me about our company, our Royal Bank of Canada, that can I translate the benefit into financial terms? Not really. I can't do that. However, I certainly know that it really is helping us fulfill the purpose that we have, which is helping our clients thrive and communities prosper. And when our clients see that the executive team or the people who are serving them are reflected in what they are, they are very attracted to us. They get then inspired, and then the talent flows in. I can share lots and lots of examples where you would not have even thought of, and how RBC as an organization has benefited. I got inspired by somebody who was wearing a turban 28 years ago, and then I'm sure today when they see me, what I am doing, I'm inspiring a lot of smart kids to join in, whether they're wearing turbans or different colors, or women, or people with disabilities that we talked about.
In fact, we want to talk about young people a little bit, because I wanted to ask Herta, for example, so is it just a matter of time? Because the young people, the younger generation, for them, a lot of this is the norm. They don't need to make a conscious effort. It's normal to have friends with different abilities, doing different things. So is it just a matter of time before it will be the norm?
I see a difference between developed markets and emerging markets. It's true that the younger generation in the West, for example, they look at us like dinosaurs, saying, what are you on about? What are you talking about? Barriers to entry, whatever. It's different in emerging markets in many countries where the girl child is still a second-class citizen, and you have 8-year-old girls who are giving birth and so forth. So it's a shocking environment. So to me, this issue of diversity and inclusion, to some extent, is an existential question.
Absolutely.
It is not a nice to have.
Yes.
It's an existential question, and to my mind, it really needs to be owned by the boards of the large multinational companies, of the banks, of the parastatals, central banks, etc. It needs to start at those very, very significant institutions as well.
So large organisations, got to be a board issue as well. Finally, if I could bring Kim in, how does the banking industry actually benchmark against other industries? How are you doing?
Well, I think we're doing good in the efforts we're putting in place. I think, we ran an employee engagement survey and we're seen as doing well in diversity and inclusion. So there's a perception we're doing well. If you were to look at the numbers, I'm not sure the numbers would match the perception that there's a lot of improvement compared to other industries. But I feel that there is the desire there. Maybe more so than I'm hearing from other industries, because I think there's been lots of lessons learned over the past several years around, what banks could have done better had they had
and you
more
know what? This is a
diversity.
discussion that we could have for a long time and carry on, but unfortunately we have run out of time. We are almost like a real TV show on air, so yes, that does happen. Thank you all so much for coming in and speaking with us.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Our pleasure. Very good.
Well, finally, we are going to hear from the head of trade, supply chain and export finance at Danske Bank, Soren Haugaard.
Yes, Soren is the new chairperson of the Corporate Advisory Group, senior bankers who are supporting the SWIFT for Corporate initiative. And we wanted to hear his thoughts on his new role and the challenges ahead.
Soren Haugaard, welcome to Sibos TV. Thanks
you
for
very
speaking
much.
with us. So what
Thanks for having me.
what are corporates really asking from banks, especially large organizations that trade and operate internationally?
I think what is really important to a corporate of any size, really, if they are in multiple jurisdictions, to have a channel to conduct their financial business which is secure, which is easy to use, and somehow standardized in its form and shape. So I think those are sort of the three main criteria that corporates would be looking for.
And do you think banks are investing enough in understanding the needs of corporates? Are they, making the effort to really find out what's required out there?
The easy answer would be yes. I think it's probably more complex than that. If I look across banks, including my own, we can definitely do more. And I think one of the key issues that we are struggling with is to really understand what the corporate is doing, his business, his value chain, his supply chain. Getting into that discussion with the corporate and understanding that is also providing some good clues to banks as to how to service the corporate and to cover his needs.
And that's a challenge because it takes a lot of time and effort?
I think it's a challenge because, traditionally most banks have been sort of, if I may use the term, product pushing. You design a nice product in cash management or a nice product in asset management, and then you put it on the shelf and customers will come. Right. It has changed a bit since then, and particularly for the large corporates of this world, who are truly global. They have other needs, and they are not necessarily buying off-the-shelf products, but more customized, and that requires for us really to know their business and their business model.
And that also means you invest in them and in each other, because it's a long-term relationship. It takes a lot of time. A
relationship, but maybe even more a partnership.
Right.
Isn't it? I mean, if you have a partnership, you care about each other and you do invest mutually in that relationship. And that is really what this is about, I think. And that's where SWIFT has a unique role as a global organization to provide a network of banks who apply to the same standards when communicating with each other, who are connected into a very safe environment which corporates then can benefit from.
Well, as you mentioned, there's a lot of buzz about the talk for standardization across the board, especially in services for corporates. In your experience, are corporates good at asking for the innovations they want, or are banks sort of kind of pushing it to them and saying maybe use this platform instead?
I mean, when I started in banking many years ago, the topic was we all need a platform for our customers. Obviously, if you're a customer in, say, 10 jurisdictions across the globe, you really don't want to have 10 different computers on your desk, right? So that was the start of that whole discussion. That's really where Swift 20 years ago came into a fruitful discussion with the banks who own Swift about, okay, so how can a bank-agnostic platform be created that will actually benefit the corporates, so that they don't need 10 platforms, but only one when they do their international banking business.
Do you think that is key to helping businesses grow, to helping corporates expand?
It's part of it. It's one element. And corporates as banks, we all faced with some challenges in terms of how do we apply our resources in the most efficient way. And surely for a corporate who has an international business, the cost of running that business is important, and therefore if we can provide as banks, as a community via Swift, an easier way, a simpler way, a less expensive way for him to conduct his business, then it makes sense.
Any concerns when regulation comes into play? Does that complicate things further?
There's a big debate here at Sibos around regulation. A few years back, we started on the KYC register, which are helping banks to better understand, who we are dealing with. That discussion is now also moving into the corporate space, and part of my chairmanship, if you will, on the CAC, as you mentioned in the intro. This is definitely one of the things we're looking at also. Can we also extend that to the corporate world and make it easier for corporates in that space? This is and for corporates that are using Swift, and those truly global corporates, they have the same issues as banks. I mean, they need to do a due diligence process on their banking partners, as well as we have to do a due diligence process on our partners in the corporate space. So again, it's a mutual partnership.
Right. And as you mentioned, I mean, many things are similar. For instance, cybersecurity is one of the key things that banks are looking at. But from the corporate point of view, I mean, how vulnerable are they? Is that an area that is of big concern as well?
In my institution at Danske Bank, we've been through an exercise with our customers about CEO fraud, just to give you an example. Phishing is another example where corporates are hurt because they have a very open infrastructure, right? I mean, the Internet of Things is providing us a lot of benefits, and we can all, both corporates and banks, enjoy a lot of new things because of that. But it also opens up for the crooks of this world, and they only need to get it right once. We need to make sure that they never succeed in actually getting in, and the corporates are vulnerable. They might have people that are not totally up to speed with how they operate the systems. You and I are both on Facebook, I'm sure.
Right.
And we apply the security levels that we believe and deem are relevant. But if I take the same regime into my bank, for instance, it's a totally different regime that I need to adhere to in the bank compared to how I navigate the security on my Facebook, for instance.
Right.
And so there's an element there of this concern and maybe some issues that corporates need to look a little bit more closely at.
But then again, it's a big challenge because we're in an age where we're talking all about connectivity and collaboration, and in a way we're wanting to share more utilities and resources. So it means opening up. At the same time, you're saying I have to be more careful.
Yeah, well, I'm not saying we should close down. I think we should open up. Corporates should open up, but we need to think about what we do.
Yeah.
Right. And the programs that Swift are launching this week to the banks about security, about transparency, about exchanging information amongst us so that we can collectively try to combat this. Same thing applies for corporates. And there I'm sure that we as banks and Swift indeed can help corporates also to be more alert and maybe give them some tools to manage this.
Well, let's talk a bit about the Swift for Corporates program.
Yeah.
What has been the experience of corporates who have been on that program?
I have been there now for a number of years. It was already 20 years ago as the first corporate were put onto the system through the banks. And obviously, as this is creating some efficiencies for the large global corporates, then that's where we started. There's about 1,300 groups of corporates now on the network using SWIFT through their banks. And the ambition of SWIFT is by 2020 to have 3,000 corporates, broadening it out across the geography, so that Asia is an area where there's a lot of hype now about how can we get some of the big Chinese, some of the big Singaporean companies onto the network, but also in terms of the segment going deeper into the corporate space. So this, if you look at Fortune 500, about 50%, I think it's 48% of the Fortune 500 companies are using SWIFT today. There's surely some potential, but if you look into the next level of corporates, then it's much fewer and much far between. And there's some work for SWIFT to do. And there, I think the corporate advisory group, with the people we have on that team, can sort of give some direction to SWIFT as to how they should achieve that goal.
When you say deeper into the corporates, I mean, can you give us some examples of certain areas, perhaps, that you're focusing on that you feel that could be further developed?
Well, deeper is in terms of the segmentation of corporates. You have the Fortune 500 companies, and then you have a long list of sizable corporates in different jurisdictions that are also multinational. Those are the companies I'm talking about when I talk about going deeper into the segment. But you could also talk about going deeper into the wallet of products or wallet of services. This started out by, FX. Then came on liquidity. Then came on trade finance. Surely there are other areas where SWIFT, together with the banks, should develop features that will benefit the corporate's use of this platform.
Any concerns that corporates may have almost sometimes too much to choose from? There are many different options out there, and sometimes you're not quite sure which direction. You're sort of taking a bit of a gamble, right? Because you're not sure what will pay off in the long term.
Yeah. Well, it's not just a gamble, because there is actually a dialogue with the corporates. Yeah. Remember that SWIFT for corporates is through the banks, right? So the corporate advisory group, which is about 15 senior bankers from all sorts of banking and geography, would have some good insights as to what their customers actually are needing. So that's what we try to bring in. We try to consolidate that information, and then we bring it across to SWIFT and say, okay, in your product development, in your marketing, maybe you should think about these things, and then they come back to us and test it, and then it's brought to the market. So it's not just, this is not just a closed laboratory in La Hulpe where people are thinking of great ideas. It's really in dialogue with the corporates.
Right. And I guess what you're saying is by the time it is offered, it has been well thought out and evaluated before.
I believe so,
yeah. Is this also something that only perhaps larger corporates might benefit from? Will the smaller entities feel a bit left out, that they may not benefit from these developments?
I mean, small entities, you mean small corporate companies?
Just smaller companies in general.
Well, this is not exclusively a club for large multinationals, but I think there's a threshold from a corporate's point of view as to what needs do we need to cover here. And if a corporate is in, say, let's take my example. I'm headquartered in Copenhagen, right? And if I have a customer who's operating in Denmark, Sweden, and Norway, he really doesn't need SWIFT. Because he can operate all his accounts through me or some of my good competitors in the Nordic space on the same platform. But if you talk about the same company being active in Singapore, in Sao Paulo, in New York, in Paris, then that's a different discussion, because there he needs to have a local account somewhere, no matter how big or how small he is. And then maybe the value propositions from SWIFT is relevant for him to consider.
So this is the point again where I guess having the banks and the corporates understand each other and what are their needs will really make a difference, because then they can say what is suitable for you.
Yes.
Long-term strategy on SWIFT for corporates then. What is that?
Well, SWIFT for corporates is now embedded into SWIFT as a segment that is important to SWIFT. Right. I mentioned just before the target of 3,000 corporates to become active on the network by 2020. and if that is achieved, then that franchise will actually, both in terms of actual users of SWIFT, but also in terms of revenue stream to SWIFT, be relevant. So this is a path that SWIFT has chosen to go. This is supported by the banks, who sees a relevance in the global servicing of corporates by SWIFT. So I would say it's here to stay.
Okay. One last question very quickly. What are you looking forward to at Sibos here in Geneva?
I'm looking forward to having fantastic, good discussions with people like yourself and some of my good friends in the banking world. We have a number of corporates also attending who we'll have a couple of sessions with throughout the program. We'll have on Wednesday, there will actually be a small cocktail celebrating the 20 years of Corporate to Swift. So there's plenty of things to look forward to.
All right, Sen. Well, thanks so much for speaking with us.
But thank you for having me.
Well, that wraps up another lunch with Sibos.
We'll be back with Sibos today at 3 o'clock. In the meantime, stay tuned to Sibos TV for the session CSD Space. What about the distributed ledger technology? We'll be back later.
See you.